Iona Sterling couldn't breathe. She was curled up as small as possible on the floor of this fancy Genesis car, trying not to make a sound. The smell of new leather and some expensive cologne filled her nose while she pressed her face into the carpet. Just outside, like, literally inches away, Madame Yun's designer heels were clicking on the concrete of the mansion's garage. Click. 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 She couldn't have gone far, Madame Yun snapped. Check every car. I want that thief found. Now. Iona squeezed her eyes shut. The security guys were everywhere, opening and closing car doors, getting closer by the second. After 8 miserable months working in this house, it was all going to end with her in handcuffs, or worse. Someone yelled something in Korean from across the garage. The footsteps stopped for a moment. Then the driver's door opened right above her. Iona froze. Someone slid into the seat. The engine started up with a soft purr that vibrated through the floor. Through a tiny gap, she could see Madame Yun's red-bottomed shoes turn as she shouted at the security team. Then Iona looked up and caught a pair of dark eyes watching her in the rearview mirror. It was Jin Suk-bin, the master of the house. The man everyone whispered about. The man whose name made people in certain parts of LA go quiet. And he was staring right at her. But his face didn't change. He didn't look surprised or angry. He just looked at her. And then the car started moving. As they passed through the security gate, he finally spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. I'll protect you. 3 simple words that would flip her entire life upside down. If you've ever been trapped with someone who makes your life a living nightmare, you know that desperate feeling of needing to escape. This story might just show you what real courage looks like in the face of cruelty. Do me a favor and smash that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Trust me, what happens in the next 30 seconds changes everything for Iona. Just 12 hours earlier, Iona had been polishing silver in the dining room, catching glimpses of herself in the spoons. 27 years old and wearing a stiff white uniform that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. You missed a spot. Iona didn't even jump anymore when Madame Yun appeared out of nowhere behind her. 8 months of this had trained that reflex right out of her system. Yes, madam. I'll go over it again. Madame Yun was wearing some designer outfit that probably cost more than Iona made in 3 months. Her hair was cut in this perfect bob that never moved, not even when she was yelling. And boy, could she yell. When you finish, the windows in the west hallway need cleaning. They're streaked. She made this little sniffing sound. I don't understand why Jean insists we keep American staff when they clearly don't understand proper standards. Iona let the insult roll off her back. She'd heard way worse, especially when Madame Yun had her fancy friends over and talked about Iona in Korean, thinking she couldn't understand a word. What Madame Yun didn't know was that Mrs. Park, the sweet old cook, had been teaching Iona Korean on the side. Not enough to speak it, but enough to understand when they were trashing her. 3 years of nursing school, 2 more working hospital shifts until her feet bled to pay for her mom's cancer treatments, and here she was, polishing rich people's silverware. But the pay was double what she'd make as a new nurse, and those medical bills weren't going to pay themselves. Miss Sterling. Iona looked up, surprised that Madame Yun was actually speaking directly to her for once. My diamond tennis bracelet is missing from my dressing room. Oh no. Iona felt her stomach drop. I haven't been in your dressing room today, madam. She carefully put down the spoon she'd been polishing. I've been working down here since breakfast. Yet somehow, it's gone. And you were seen on that floor this morning. I just delivered fresh towels to the linen closet, but I didn't. 15 carats. White diamonds. Platinum setting. Madame Yun stepped closer, her fancy perfume suddenly way too strong. Worth more than you would earn in 10 years. Quite a temptation for someone with money problems. A chill ran down Iona's spine. How did she know about the latest hospital bill? That collection notice had just arrived yesterday in her private P.O. box downtown. I would never steal from you or Mr. Bin, Iona said, standing straighter and looking Madame Yun in the eye, which she realized too late was a big mistake. Such disrespect. Madame Yun's voice got real quiet. I've put up with you because my husband thinks your work is acceptable. A mistake I now regret. She raised her voice and called out in Korean. Mr. Kong appeared in the doorway, looking like he always did, like he could break someone in half without messing up his suit. Everyone in the house knew to stay out of his way. The staff whispered about his military background and the things he'd done for the family business. Search her room, Madame Yun ordered in English, obviously wanting Iona to understand every word. And then search her. Thoroughly. Mr. Kong just nodded once. I'll call the police when you find it, Madame Yun continued. Theft over $50,000 is grand larceny in California. That's a felony, I believe. Iona felt like someone had punched her in the chest. A felony would end everything. No nursing license, no hospital job, no future. Period. Madame Yun, please, I didn't. Take her to the security office while they search. Madame Yun turned away like Iona had already disappeared. I have guests at 7, and I won't have this mess disturbing dinner. Mr. Kong stepped forward. Iona knew exactly what the security office meant, a windowless room in the basement with soundproofed walls. She'd brought food there once when they were questioning some poor delivery guy who showed up without the right ID. Can I use the bathroom first? She asked, keeping her voice steady. Mr. Kong hesitated, then nodded. Make it quick. Iona walked to the staff bathroom near the kitchen, being careful not to move too fast. Her mind was racing through options, each one worse than the last. The mansion had cameras everywhere. Except for one spot. The service entrance to the garage had been under repair for 2 days, with the security camera temporarily out. She'd heard Mr. Kong complaining about the contractor's delays that very morning. In the bathroom, Iona splashed cold water on her face and looked in the mirror. The woman staring back didn't even look like her anymore, eyes wide with fear, shoulders all tensed up. This wasn't her life. This wasn't what she'd fought so hard for. That's when she made up her mind. She took a deep breath, stepped out of the bathroom, and instead of heading to the security office, she turned toward the kitchen's back hallway. Mr. Kong was talking into his radio with his back turned. She slipped through the swinging door, past the big fridges, and through the narrow hallway to the service entrance. Her heart was pounding so loud she swore everyone in the mansion could hear it. The garage door opened with a soft click. She stepped into the dim space filled with ridiculously expensive cars, the Bentley, the Maybach, a bunch of Mercedes SUVs. And there in the corner, a black Genesis sedan with the driver's door not quite closed. She heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. They'd already noticed she was gone. Iona didn't think, she just moved, diving into the back of the sedan and curling up on the floor behind the driver's seat. The carpet was soft against her cheek as she pulled her knees up to her chest. And that's where she was when Jin Sukbin found her and said those 5 words that changed everything. The car smoothly left Bel Air behind, cruising past all those massive houses into Beverly Hills. Iona stayed frozen on the floor, not sure if she should sit up or stay hidden. Then he made the decision for her. You can sit up now, Jin Sukbin said, his eyes finding hers in the mirror again. No one's following us. Slowly, Iona pulled herself onto the back seat. Her uniform was all wrinkled, and her neatly pinned bun was falling apart. She'd never been this close to him before. In 8 months, she'd only seen him from a distance, coming and going for meetings or eating alone in his study. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, maybe late 30s. His face was all sharp angles except for his eyes, which seemed surprisingly gentle. His suit probably cost more than her car, but he only wore a simple wedding ring. Jin spoke into his phone in rapid Korean. Whatever he said made the driver in another car behind them suddenly turn and head in the opposite direction. Their car sped up, heading west toward the ocean on Sunset Boulevard. They say the devil you know is better than the one you don't, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers in the mirror. His English was perfect with just a hint of an accent. But they haven't met my wife. He pulled over at one of those lookout spots on Mulholland Drive, where the whole city spreads out below like a sea of lights. When he turned to look at her directly, his face was impossible to read. Now tell me, Iona Sterling, how far are you willing to go to disappear completely? The city lights blurred outside the car window as Jean Sukbin steered the Genesis down Mulholland Drive toward the coast. Iona sat stiffly in the back seat, her hands clutched in her lap, trying to process what had just happened. 1 minute she'd been polishing silver, and the next she was fleeing in her employer's car, accused of a theft she didn't commit. Are you hungry? Jean asked suddenly, breaking the silence. The question was so normal, so unexpected, that Iona almost laughed. No. Yes. I don't know. She shook her head. I don't think I can eat right now. Jean nodded, his eyes on the road. Fear does that. But you should try. It's going to be a long night. He pulled into a drive-thru, something so ordinary that it seemed bizarre given the circumstances. A man who probably owned half of Los Angeles ordering burgers through a scratchy speaker. He passed a bag back to her without comment. Thank you, she said automatically, the manners her mother had drilled into her surfacing even now. You're wondering if you made a mistake, Jean said as they merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway, the ocean a dark void to their right. If jumping into my car was worse than facing my wife. Iona unwrapped the burger slowly. The thought crossed my mind. Smart. You should be cautious. He adjusted the rearview mirror so he could see her better. You know what people say about me? Some of it. Iona took a small bite, suddenly realizing how hungry she actually was. The staff talks. And what do they say? That your shipping company is just the surface. That you handle things for people who can't go to the police. That you're connected. Jin's mouth curved slightly. Connected. That's a polite way of putting it. He drove in silence for a while, the highway emptying as they headed north along the coastline. The mansions grew more spaced out, hidden behind high walls and security gates. My father came to America in 1980, Jean said suddenly. He had nothing but determination. He built legitimate businesses, shipping, import-export, real estate. But in Koreatown back then, you needed protection. The police wouldn't help Korean immigrants. So we protected ourselves. Iona listened, understanding the unspoken parts of his story. Now we're respectable. Most of my businesses are completely legitimate. I sit on charity boards. I donate to political campaigns. He glanced at her in the mirror. But some problems still can't be solved through official channels. And your wife? Iona asked cautiously. Where does she fit in? His knuckles whitened slightly on the steering wheel. Marriages in my world are rarely about love. The Yun family controls shipping routes I needed. My family offered the legitimacy and American connections they wanted. His voice was matter-of-fact. It was a business arrangement. That sounds lonely, Iona said before she could stop herself. Jin's eyes met hers in the mirror again, something flickering in them she couldn't read. Yes. It is. The car turned off the highway onto a narrow road winding up into the Malibu hills. After a series of switchbacks, they approached a gate nestled between tall hedges. Jean rolled down his window and placed his hand on a scanner. The gate slid open silently. Welcome to my actual home, he said as they pulled into a circular driveway. The house was nothing like the mansion in Bel Air. It was modern but warm, glass and wood perched on the cliff edge with the Pacific spread out below. No ostentatious columns or marble statues, just clean lines and warm lighting. No one knows about this place except my most trusted people, Jean explained as he led her inside. Not even my wife. The interior was even more beautiful, open and airy with a huge stone fireplace and floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the ocean view. Art pieces that looked genuinely valuable hung on the walls, not the gaudy reproductions Madame Yun favored. "You'll be safe here tonight," Jean said, leading her to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, which was fully stocked. "Make yourself comfortable. The guest room is down that hall, first door on the right. There are clothes in the closet that should fit." Iona stood awkwardly in the center of the kitchen, suddenly aware of her wrinkled uniform and messy hair. "Mr. Bin." "Jean," he corrected, pouring 2 glasses of water. "Jean," she repeated, the familiarity feeling strange on her tongue. "Why are you helping me? You must know I didn't take that bracelet." He handed her a glass. "Of course I know. My wife misplaced it last week. It's in her jewelry safe in our Tokyo apartment." Iona nearly choked. "Then why would she?" "Because she wanted you gone," Jean said simply. "And my wife is used to getting what she wants." "But why me? There are a dozen staff members at the house." Jean leaned against the counter, studying her with those unreadable eyes. "Because you're different. You don't cower. You look people in the eye. And..." He hesitated, "because you've been learning Korean." It was Iona's turn to be surprised. "You knew about that?" "Mrs. Park mentioned it. My wife also noticed. She doesn't like the idea of you understanding what she says when she thinks you can't." Iona set her glass down carefully. "So what happens now? The police will be looking for me." "No, they won't," Jean said confidently. "By morning, the bracelet will have been found in the garden. A simple misunderstanding." "Just like that?" "Just like that." He pushed himself away from the counter. "But that still leaves us with the problem of you." "Me? You can't go back to the house. My wife won't stop. The next accusation might be more difficult to disprove." Iona felt a chill despite the warm room. "What am I supposed to do? I can't just disappear." She stopped herself. "Your mother's medical bills," Jean finished for her. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Treatment at Cedars-Sinai." Iona stared at him. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know who works in my house." He walked to a sideboard and opened a drawer, returning with 2 items. "I can help you vanish," Jean said, sliding a black credit card across the table. "Or..." He placed a small key beside it. "You can stay under my protection. But understand this, if you choose to stay, Madame Yun won't be the only danger you face. The choice is yours." His phone buzzed with a message that made his expression darken. "And you have exactly 5 minutes to decide." Iona stared at the items on the table, a black credit card that probably had no spending limit and a small silver key. 2 very different futures laid out in front of her. 5 minutes isn't much time for a life-changing decision, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Jean checked his watch. 4 minutes, 20 seconds now. Why the rush? Because my wife has just called a private investigator friend of hers. A man who doesn't ask questions when the money is right. Iona reached for the credit card, running her finger along its edge. This would let me disappear? Start over somewhere new? Jean nodded. It has $100,000 available. Enough to go anywhere, create a new identity, handle your mother's medical bills for a while. And the key? To a guest house on this property. You'd stay here, under my protection. As what exactly? Iona asked, narrowing her eyes. I'm not interested in trading one type of servitude for another. A flash of surprise crossed Jin's face, quickly replaced by something that might have been respect. Not as staff. As someone under my protection while we solve a mutual problem. Iona picked up the key, feeling its weight. Freedom with uncertainty or safety with strings attached. Her mother had always told her to trust her gut. I'll stay, she said finally. But I want to know exactly what I'm agreeing to. Jean smiled slightly. You made the right choice. The card wouldn't have worked anyway. What? Iona's eyes widened. It's a real card with real money, but my wife's PI friend would have tracked any transactions within hours. You'd have been found before you crossed state lines. He took the card back. I needed to know if you were smart enough to see the trap. Iona let out a breath. So there was no real choice. There's always a choice. Yours was between bad odds and better ones. Jean pocketed the card. Now, let's discuss the arrangement. Just then, the front door opened. Iona tensed, but Jean remained calm as a man entered. He was slightly shorter than Jean but with a solid build that suggested serious strength beneath his expensive suit. His face remained completely neutral as he took in Iona's presence. Ah, Minho, perfect timing, Jean said. This is Iona Sterling. She'll be our guest for a while. Minho bowed slightly. Miss Sterling. Minho is my right hand, Jean explained. Nothing happens in my business without his knowledge. And what exactly is your business? Iona asked. The real one, I mean. Jean and Minho exchanged a glance. Problem solving, Jean answered. For people and situations that require discretion. He means we fix things the legal system can't or won't, Minho added, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating presence. Sometimes that's legitimate. Sometimes it's not. Minho, please bring Mrs. Park in. She's probably worrying in the car, Jean said. Moments later, the elderly cook from the mansion shuffled in, her face lighting up when she saw Iona. Oh. You're safe. Mrs. Park hurried over, taking Iona's hands in her own weathered ones. When I heard what happened, I was so worried. Mrs. Park has agreed to stay here as well, Jean explained. Since she's been teaching you Korean, you can continue your lessons. And cook proper meals for you, Mrs. Park added. You're too skinny from all that running around the mansion. Iona felt tears prick at her eyes, the first familiar face, the first genuine warmth she'd felt since this nightmare began. Thank you for coming. Minho will show you both to your quarters, Jean said. We'll talk more in the morning. The guest house was attached to the main building by a covered walkway. Though smaller than Jin's house, it was still luxurious, 2 bedrooms, a living area, and a kitchen that made Iona's old apartment look like a closet. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the same breathtaking ocean view. After Mrs. Park had fussed over her and finally gone to bed, Iona stood at the window, watching waves crash against the cliffs below. The place was beautiful, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being in a gilded cage. No matter how soft the sheets or how stunning the view, she was still trapped. She couldn't sleep. Around midnight, she wandered into the kitchen to make tea. As the water heated, memories of the life she'd left behind washed over her. 3 years earlier. The test results aren't good, Miss Sterling. The doctor's face was professionally sympathetic as he showed Iona's mother the scan images. The cancer has spread to the liver. Iona gripped her mother's hand. At 49, Diane Sterling looked 20 years older, her body ravaged by the disease. What are our options? Iona asked, because her mother couldn't. There's an experimental treatment program. It shows promise for cases like your mother's, but... He hesitated. It's not covered by insurance, Iona finished for him. Unfortunately, no. The out-of-pocket cost is substantial. Later that night, Iona sat at their small kitchen table, surrounded by bills and student loan statements. 2 years left in nursing school. No way to work full-time and finish her degree. Her mother sleeping in the next room, unaware that Iona was about to drop out. The job listing had appeared in her email that same night. Private household staff for an affluent family. Requirements, discretion, willingness to live on site, no criminal record. Salary, 3 times what she'd make as a nursing assistant. It seemed like fate. Or a devil's bargain. A soft cough pulled Iona from her memories. She turned to find Jean standing in the doorway. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, looking more casual in dark jeans and a simple button-down shirt. "I saw the light. I couldn't sleep. Few people can, their first night in a strange place." He nodded toward the kettle. "May I join you?" They sat at the kitchen island with steaming mugs of tea. Jean turned on a small TV mounted under the cabinet, keeping the volume low. "You should see this," he said. It was a local news broadcast. Madame Yun stood outside the Bel Air mansion, looking appropriately distressed as cameras flashed. Deeply concerned for Miss Sterling's safety, she was saying. "She left in a very emotional state after the misunderstanding. We just want to know she's all right." The screen showed Iona's driver's license photo. "She's reporting me missing?" Iona asked incredulously. "Not as a thief. The bracelet was found this afternoon," Jean explained. "Now she's playing the concerned employer. It's actually worse for you this way." "How is that worse?" "If you were accused of theft, you could fight it legally. This way, she looks sympathetic while the entire city searches for you. And when you're found in my company." He let the implication hang. Iona understood. "People would think you took me." "Exactly. My wife is smarter than she looks." He muted the TV. "But I have a plan to clear your name and get you your life back." "Why would you do that for me?" Jean studied her for a long moment. "Because you're useful to me." "Useful how?" Jean pulled out a laptop and opened it. "The bracelet wasn't the only thing she's hidden," he said, typing in a password. The screen showed security footage from the mansion. "For 3 years, I've suspected my wife has been feeding information to my enemies." He paused, studying Iona's reaction. "That's where you come in. You're going to help me prove it, by becoming the person she fears most, someone who knows her secrets." "Your pronunciation is improving," Mrs. Park said with a smile as Iona repeated the Korean phrase for the 5th time. "But your tongue is still too flat on the second syllable." It had been 2 weeks since Iona had hidden in Jin's car and her days had fallen into a strange new routine. Mornings were for Korean lessons with Mrs. Park, afternoons for whatever training Jin or Minho had planned, and evenings were spent watching the news reports about her disappearance gradually move from headline to footnote. Again, Mrs. Park insisted, tapping the table with her wooden spoon. Iona sighed but repeated the phrase. Language had always come easily to her, but Korean was challenging. All those subtle sounds her English-trained mouth struggled to form. "Better." Mrs. Park beamed. "You'll be arguing with Madame Yun in her own language before you know it." "That's the goal, isn't it?" Iona said, stretching her stiff shoulders. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table for 3 hours. The sliding door opened and Jean walked in, dressed in one of his immaculate suits. He'd been gone since dawn, handling whatever mysterious business kept his empire running. "How are the lessons?" he asked, loosening his tie. "She's a natural," Mrs. Park said proudly before excusing herself to start dinner. Jean poured himself a glass of water, watching Iona over the rim as he drank. These moments still felt strange to her, the powerful Jean Suk-bin in casual domestic settings, drinking water in her kitchen, asking about her day like they were normal people with normal lives. "Ready for this afternoon?" he asked. Iona closed her textbook. "Depends. What torture do you have planned today? More business spreadsheets or another etiquette lesson on which fork to use when you're blackmailing someone?" Jean almost smiled. "Almost. Self-defense." Iona groaned. "Minho is going to throw me on the floor again, isn't he?" "Not today. I'll be teaching you myself." That was new. Usually, Jean oversaw her training but delegated the actual teaching to others, financial advisors for business lessons, cultural consultants for etiquette, Minho for security protocols. "Why the change?" she asked. "Minho is too careful with you. You need to learn what it feels like when someone isn't holding back." An hour later, Iona stood barefoot on training mats in the home gym, dressed in workout clothes Jean had provided. Everything in her new wardrobe fit perfectly, which was unsettling in itself. Jean had changed too, trading his suit for black athletic pants and a simple t-shirt that revealed arms more muscled than his business attire suggested. This wasn't the polished businessman or careful strategist, this was something more primal. The first rule, Jean said, circling her slowly, is to accept that in a real fight, you will get hurt. Your goal isn't to avoid pain. It's to survive despite it. That's cheerful, Iona muttered. I'm not teaching you to win tournaments. I'm teaching you to stay alive. Jean moved suddenly, grabbing her wrist faster than she could react. What do you do now? Iona tried to pull away, but his grip was like iron. Don't pull. That's what everyone expects. Jean positioned himself behind her. Feel my balance. Where is my weight centered? She focused, feeling the slight pressure of his chest against her back, the way he was leaning slightly forward. Forward, on your toes, she said. Good. So. In a quick movement, Iona stepped back into him and dropped her weight, breaking his grip and causing him to stumble slightly. Jean nodded approvingly. You learn quickly. They continued for an hour, Jean attacking, Iona defending, occasionally succeeding but mostly failing as she learned how vulnerable the human body really is, and how many ways there are to exploit those vulnerabilities. Enough, Jean finally said, offering her a towel. You're improving. Iona wiped sweat from her face, wincing at the developing bruise on her forearm. Is this really necessary? I thought I was here to help you catch your wife passing information, not get into street fights. Jin's expression darkened. My wife isn't the only threat. The people she's working with wouldn't hesitate to use you once they discover your connection to me. And what exactly is my connection to you, Jean? Iona asked directly. Am I your employee? Your prisoner? Your, what? The question hung in the air between them. Jean stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the clean sweat from their training. You're under my protection, he said simply. For now, that's all that matters. Later that evening, Iona sat in Jin's office, watching him work. This had become part of her education too, observing how he handled business calls, learning the structure of his legitimate operations and getting glimpses of the not-so-legitimate ones. Jean spoke in rapid Korean to someone on the phone, his tone firm but controlled. From the bits she could understand, someone had failed to deliver something on time, and Jean was not pleased. When he hung up, she asked, what happens to people who disappoint you? Jean glanced up. They get a second chance. Not a third. And what does that mean exactly? It means whatever they imagine it means. Jean leaned back in his chair. Fear of consequences is often more effective than the consequences themselves. That's not very reassuring. I'm not trying to reassure you, Iona. I'm trying to prepare you. He gestured to the wall of monitors showing news feeds and security cameras. My wife has hired 3 different private investigators to find you. The story has gone national. Your face is on every major network. One screen showed Madame Yun at a press conference, dabbing at crocodile tears. We just want to know she's safe, she was saying. Iona was like family. Iona snorted. Family she accused of theft and threatened to have searched by security. She's playing the concerned employer perfectly, Jean said. Meanwhile, she's offered a $50,000 reward for information on your whereabouts. That's a lot of money. It's nothing to her. But it means every bounty hunter and glory seeker in California is looking for you. Jean turned to face her fully. Which is why your education needs to accelerate. Tomorrow, you're coming with me to a meeting. What kind of meeting? The kind where you'll see what I really do. The restaurant was in downtown Los Angeles, an upscale Korean place called Hanseong that occupied the top floor of a skyscraper Jean apparently owned. Iona sat at a private table in the corner, dressed in designer clothes she still wasn't comfortable wearing, watching Jean across the room. He was meeting with 3 older Korean men, their conversation too quiet and distant for her to hear. Minho stood beside her, vigilant as always. "Who are they?" Iona asked softly. "Community leaders," Minho answered. "They come to Jean when they have problems the police can't solve." "What kind of problems?" "Today? Protection money demands from a new gang targeting Korean businesses." "Last month? A senator threatening to block permits for businesses in Koreatown unless they contributed to his campaign." "And Jean fixes these problems?" Minho's face remained impassive. "Mr. Bin ensures balance." Iona watched as one of the men slid an envelope across the table. Jean didn't touch it, just nodded slightly. "Is that a payment?" she asked. "A list of businesses being targeted," Minho corrected. "Mr. Bin doesn't take money for community matters. But he does for other things." Minho finally looked at her directly. "Everyone pays for protection, Iona. Some with money, some with loyalty, some with services. You're paying with your help against Madame Yun. There's always a price." The meeting concluded, and Jean walked over to their table, the envelope now in his inner pocket. "Did you learn anything?" he asked her. "That you're more complicated than you seem." Jean almost smiled. "Good observation. Let's go, we have another stop." The stop turned out to be a small convenience store in Koreatown. The elderly owner bowed deeply when Jean entered. They spoke briefly in Korean, the man gesturing to security cameras mounted near the register. Jean turned to Iona. "Mr. Choi's store was robbed last week. The police took a report but said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it. So you're going to find who did it?" Iona asked. "Minho already has," Jean said. "Now we're ensuring it doesn't happen again." As they left, Iona noticed 3 hard-looking men arrive in a black SUV, entering the store after them. She didn't ask what they were going to do. Back in the car, Jean was quiet, reviewing something on his phone. "You protect them," Iona said finally. "The Korean community." "Someone has to," Jean replied without looking up. "When my father came to America, he learned quickly that immigrants need to create their own justice." "Is that what you're doing?" "Justice?" Jean finally met her eyes. "I'm doing what's necessary." Days turned into weeks. Iona's Korean improved rapidly. She learned about Jin's businesses, shipping, real estate, technology investments. She studied Madame Yun's patterns, preparing for whatever role Jean was grooming her for. And every day, the connection between them grew more complex. He was still mysterious, still dangerous, but she'd glimpsed moments of genuine kindness, even vulnerability. One night, unable to sleep, Iona wandered into the main house. Jean often worked late, and she'd taken to keeping him company, asking questions about his operations or just sitting in comfortable silence. His office door was ajar, but he wasn't at his desk. Instead, a folder lay open, papers spread across the surface. She should have walked away. Instead, curiosity pulled her forward. The files were about the gang targeting Korean businesses. Photos, addresses, criminal records. Jean was thorough. She was about to leave when another folder caught her eye. It had her name on it. She hesitated only briefly before opening it. Inside was a complete history of her life, employment records, medical history, financial statements. And photographs. So many photographs. Iona walking to nursing school. Iona visiting her mother in the hospital. Iona applying for the job at the mansion. Some of the photos dated back 2 years, long before she'd ever worked for the Bins. One photograph slipped from the folder, Iona at her mother's hospital bedside 2 years ago. "You've been watching me for years," she whispered, backing away as she heard Jin's footsteps approaching. "This wasn't chance. You planned all of this." Jean stood in the doorway, his face unreadable as he saw the open folder. "There are no coincidences in my world, Iona," he said quietly. The question isn't why I chose you. His eyes burned into hers. The question is why my wife is so determined to destroy you specifically. Iona stood frozen, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand. The woman in the hospital bed, her mother, looked so frail, so small against the white sheets. And the date stamp in the corner was unmistakable, 2 years ago, long before Iona had ever set foot in the Bin mansion. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jean stepped fully into the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Sit down, Iona." "I don't want to sit down," she said, anger rising through her confusion. "I want answers. Why do you have pictures of my mother?" Jin's expression softened slightly. "Because she worked for my family 25 years ago." The words hit Iona like a physical blow. "What? That's impossible. My mom was a teacher in Atlanta before we moved to Los Angeles." "Before that," Jean said, moving toward his desk and opening a drawer. He pulled out an old photograph and placed it on the table. "This was taken at my father's first restaurant in Los Angeles, 1997. Iona reluctantly moved closer. The photo showed a group of staff standing in front of a modest restaurant called Soul Garden. And there, smiling brightly in the center, was her mother, young, healthy, beautiful. "She was our head waitress for 3 years, Jean said quietly. "My father thought very highly of her." Iona sank into the chair, legs suddenly weak. "She never told me." People have reasons for keeping their past separate from their present. Jean sat across from her. "Your mother left Los Angeles suddenly in 1999. She moved to Atlanta, changed her name slightly from Diane to Diane, and started over." "Why would she do that?" Jin's eyes were steady on hers. "Because she witnessed something she shouldn't have." The pieces were starting to fall into place, forming a picture Iona wasn't sure she wanted to see. "What did she witness?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "My father protecting his business from people who wanted to destroy it." Jin's voice was matter-of-fact. It was a different time. The police wouldn't help Korean business owners. We had to defend ourselves. "You mean, violence?" Jean didn't flinch from the word. "Yes." Iona tried to process this. Her gentle, loving mother had once been part of this world, had seen things dark enough to make her flee across the country and build a new life. "She was never in danger," Jean continued. "My father made sure of that. He helped her relocate, gave her money to start over. If this is true, why would I end up working for your family again? That's too big a coincidence." Jin's gaze didn't waver. It wasn't a coincidence. The truth dawned on her slowly, like ice water seeping through her veins. "You arranged it," she whispered. "Somehow, you made sure I got that job offer." "Yes." "Why? Why would you?" She stopped as another realization hit her. "Your wife. You said she's determined to destroy me specifically. She knows who I am, doesn't she?" Jean nodded once. "She discovered the connection about 8 months ago. Shortly after you started working at the mansion. That's why she hated me from the start," Iona said, remembering all the little cruelties, the pointed comments, the impossible standards. "But why would she care about something that happened before she even knew you?" "Because Salman is obsessed with erasing anything connected to my family's past," Jean explained. "She's been systematically removing anyone who knew my father, anyone who remembers the early days. She wants our history to begin with her." Iona stood up, needing to move, to process. "So I was what, bait? A test to see how far she'd go?" Jean rose as well. "Initially, yes. I needed to understand what she was planning. But then..." "Then what?" Iona demanded. "Then I got to know you," he said simply. "And I realized you deserved better than being a pawn in this game." Iona laughed bitterly. "Yet here I am, still a pawn. Just one who knows she's on the board now." "Iona." No. She stepped back. All this time, the training, the lessons, the protection, it wasn't because you cared. It was because I'm useful in whatever war you're fighting with your wife. Jean moved toward her, stopping when she backed away further. It started that way, he admitted. But things change. People change. Save it, she snapped. I'm leaving. Tonight. I'd rather take my chances with the bounty hunters than keep being your project. She turned toward the door, but Jin's next words stopped her. Your mother's cancer treatment isn't standard. His voice was quiet. The experimental drug protocol she's receiving at Cedars-Sinai, it's not available to the public yet. Iona turned slowly. What are you saying? I arranged it, Jean said. When I found you 2 years ago, your mother had been given 6 months to live. I made some calls, pulled some strings. You're lying, she whispered, but she knew he wasn't. The miraculous acceptance into the trial program, the way her mother had stabilized when the doctors had given up hope. Check her medical records, Jean challenged. The name of the doctor who referred her, Dr. Park. He's my cousin. The room seemed to spin around her. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her mother, her choices, all of it built on secrets and manipulations. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why go to all that trouble for a stranger? Something flickered in Jin's eyes, regret, maybe, or something deeper. Because I owed your mother a debt. My father's debt. When she left, he promised to watch over her, to make sure she was taken care of. When he died 10 years ago, that responsibility passed to me. Iona pressed her hands against her temples, trying to hold herself together. So that's all I am to you? A responsibility? An obligation? Jean closed the distance between them, his movement so swift and sure that she didn't have time to back away. His hands gripped her shoulders, not roughly but firmly enough that she couldn't look away from the intensity in his eyes. You were an obligation, he said, his voice low and charged with emotion she hadn't heard from him before. Until you weren't. Until you became someone I. He stopped abruptly, releasing her and stepping back as if catching himself. Until I became what? Iona pressed, heart pounding. Jin's face closed off again, the brief glimpse of vulnerability vanishing. Someone I respect, he finished, his tone controlled once more. Someone who deserves the truth, not just protection. The moment stretched between them, taut with all the things unsaid. Iona wasn't sure if she wanted to slap him or something else entirely. I know you can feel the tension building. This is where most stories would take the predictable route, but what happens next changed everything for Iona. If you're invested in this journey and want to see how deep this conspiracy goes, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop your city in the comments because I want to know where my loyal listeners are from. Now, let's get back to the moment that turns this entire story on its head. The security alarm shattered the silence between them. Red lights flashed throughout the house as monitors in Jin's office switched to exterior camera feeds. 3 black SUVs had pulled up outside the gate, men in tactical gear spilling out. How did they find us? Iona asked, momentarily forgetting her anger in the face of immediate danger. Jean was already moving, pulling open a hidden panel in the wall to reveal an arsenal of weapons. They've been watching Minho, he said, checking a handgun before tucking it into his waistband. He must have been followed here. As if summoned by his name, Minho burst into the office, his usually impeccable appearance disheveled, a thin line of blood trickling from his temple. 6 men at the gate, for coming around the cliffside, he reported. Professional. Military-grade equipment. Jean nodded once. Get Mrs. Park to the panic room. Then take position in the East Hall. Minho's eyes darted to Iona. And Miss Sterling? She stays with me, Jean said, his tone leaving no room for argument. After Minho left, Jean handed Iona a small pistol. Remember what I taught you. Point and squeeze. Don't hesitate. The weight of the gun was unfamiliar, terrifying. "Jean, I can't." "You won't have to," he said firmly. "But having it is better than not having it." He led her through the house toward a reinforced room at the back, but they never made it. The sound of breaking glass came from somewhere near the kitchen, followed by the heavy thud of boots on tile. Jean pushed Iona behind him just as two men in black tactical gear rounded the corner. They raised their weapons, but Jean was faster. He moved with a lethal grace Iona had never seen before, closing the distance before they could fire. What happened next was almost too fast to follow. Jean struck the first man in the throat, grabbed his arm as he choked, and used him as a shield while disarming the second man. Both attackers were unconscious on the floor within seconds, without a single shot fired. "Stay close," Jean ordered, his voice colder and harder than she'd ever heard it. They moved through the house like shadows, Jean dispatching another intruder with the same efficient brutality. This wasn't the businessman Iona had come to know, this was someone else entirely, someone who had lived with violence so long it had become second nature. A burst of gunfire from another part of the house made Iona flinch. Jean pushed her into an alcove, shielding her with his body. "Minho," he murmured, listening intently. The gunfire stopped, followed by silence. They had almost reached the panic room when a final attacker appeared, this one smarter than the others. Instead of rushing Jean, he kept his distance, weapon raised. "Mrs. Ben sends her regards," the man said in accented English. Jin's face hardened. "My wife doesn't have the courage to come herself?" "She doesn't need courage when she has money," the man replied with a cold smile. He shifted his aim slightly, toward Iona. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Jean lunged forward just as the man fired. The bullet meant for Iona caught Jean in the shoulder, spinning him half around. But even wounded, his momentum carried him into the attacker. They crashed to the floor together, grappling for control of the gun. Iona stood frozen, the pistol Jean had given her heavy in her hand. Jean and the attacker rolled across the floor, a deadly dance of strength and desperation. Blood spread across Jin's shirt from the wound in his shoulder, but his face showed no pain, only focused rage. The gun between them discharged again, the sound deafening in the confined space. For a terrible moment, Iona couldn't tell who had been hit. Then Jean rose slowly to his feet, leaving the attacker motionless on the floor. He stumbled slightly, pressing his hand against his bleeding shoulder. "Are you okay?" Iona asked, rushing to his side. "It's nothing," he said, though his face had gone pale. "We need to move. There might be more." They made it to the panic room where Mrs. Park was already waiting, her eyes wide with fear. Minho joined them minutes later, confirming that all intruders had been neutralized. Jean sank into a chair, finally allowing Mrs. Park to examine his wound. "The bullet went through clean," she said after cutting away his shirt. "But you need a doctor." "Not yet," Jean said, grimacing as she cleaned the wound. "Not until I'm sure it's safe." Iona watched him, this man who had manipulated her life but had also just taken a bullet to protect her. Nothing was simple anymore, not her anger, not her gratitude, not the complicated feelings swirling inside her. Why would she do this? Iona asked finally. Sending armed men to a home she doesn't even know about. It's too extreme, even for her. Jin's eyes met hers, sharp despite his pain. Because she's making her move. This isn't just about you anymore. What do you mean? Blood trickled from the cut on Jin's forehead as he barricaded the door. They weren't just trying to find you, he said, checking his gun. They came to kill me. Which means only one thing. The window shattered as a black SUV screeched into the driveway. My wife just made her move against the family. And we're the only ones who can stop her. We need to move. Now. Jin's voice was tight with pain as Minho finished wrapping his shoulder with a makeshift bandage. This location is compromised. Iona watched the security monitors in the panic room, showing more black SUVs approaching in the distance. There are more coming. Of course there are, Jean muttered. He tapped a code into a keypad on the wall, revealing a hidden door. This leads to a tunnel that connects to the garage underneath. There's a car waiting. Mrs. Park gathered a few essentials while Minho collected weapons. Iona helped Jean to his feet, supporting his injured side. "You're bleeding through the bandage," she said quietly. "It can wait." His face was pale but determined. The tunnel was narrow and dimly lit, sloping downward into the cliff face. They emerged into a secondary garage Iona hadn't known existed, where an unmarked black sedan waited. Minho took the wheel with Mrs. Park beside him. Jean and Iona climbed into the back. As they drove through a hidden exit that emerged half a mile down the hill, Iona looked back to see flames beginning to lick at the edges of the beautiful house. Someone had set it on fire. "They're destroying everything," she whispered. "Things can be replaced," Jean said, his eyes on the road ahead. "People can't." They drove in tense silence for nearly an hour, taking back roads and switching cars twice in underground parking garages. Jean made several calls in Korean, his voice growing weaker but his instructions still precise and commanding. "Where are we going?" Iona finally asked as they headed east, away from the city. "Somewhere even my wife doesn't know about," Jean replied. "The only truly safe place left." The landscape changed, urban sprawl giving way to suburbs and then to open countryside. As dawn broke, they turned onto a hidden driveway nearly invisible from the main road. Tall trees lined a gravel path that wound up into foothills dotted with ancient oak trees. And there, nestled among them, stood a traditional Korean hanok house, wooden beams, curved tile roof, and paper screen doors surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens. "What is this place?" Iona asked, taking in the unexpected sight. "My grandfather's home," Jean said as Minho helped him from the car. "The heart of our family." Servants appeared silently, helping Mrs. Park with her bags and supporting Jean toward the main house. As they approached, the front door slid open to reveal an elderly man leaning on a wooden cane. Despite his age, Iona guessed at least 80, he stood straight, his presence commanding respect. Jean bowed deeply despite his injury. "Harabiaji," he said softly. "Grandfather." The old man's stern face softened slightly. He spoke rapidly in Korean, gesturing at Jin's bloody shirt. "I'm fine," Jean assured him in English, clearly for Iona's benefit. "But we need shelter. The Malibu house has been compromised." The old man's sharp eyes turned to Iona, assessing her with an intensity that reminded her instantly of Jean. "So this is Diane's daughter," he said, his English perfect but heavily accented. "You have your mother's eyes." Iona blinked in surprise. "You knew my mother?" "Of course." He gestured them inside. "I know everyone who has ever mattered to this family." Jin's wound was properly treated by a doctor who arrived discreetly and asked no questions. Iona was given a beautiful room overlooking a koi pond, where she showered and changed into clothes that had somehow been provided in exactly her size. By late afternoon, she joined Jean and his grandfather in a large sitting room. Jean looked better, his color returning though he moved carefully to protect his injured shoulder. "Please, sit," the old man, who had introduced himself simply as Mr. Bin, gestured to a cushion beside a low table where tea had been prepared. Iona sat awkwardly, trying to remember the proper etiquette Minho had taught her. Mr. Bin noticed her discomfort and smiled slightly. "We need not stand on ceremony when survival is at stake," he said. "My grandson tells me you have questions." "About 100, Iona admitted. The old man nodded. "And you deserve answers." But first, he turned to Jean and spoke in rapid Korean. Jean replied respectfully, bowing his head slightly at whatever his grandfather had said. "My grandfather wishes you to understand who we are," Jean translated, "before you judge what we do." Mr. Bin sipped his tea. "Our family came to America in 1975, after the war. We had nothing, no money, no connections, no language. What we did have was determination and honor." He gestured around the room, where Iona noticed for the first time old photographs hanging on the walls, showing what must have been Jin's parents and grandparents in front of a small grocery store, then a restaurant, then various other businesses. We built everything from nothing, Mr. Bin continued. But we faced obstacles. The police would not protect Korean businesses. Banks would not lend to us. So we protected ourselves. We created our own systems. You became what people needed, Iona said, understanding dawning. The old man nodded, pleased. Precisely. Not just money lenders or security, but justice when the American system failed our community. Jean sat quietly, letting his grandfather tell their story. His usual commanding presence softened in the old man's company. And my mother? Iona asked. How does she fit into this? Mr. Bin's eyes grew distant with memory. Diane was special. She worked in our first successful restaurant while studying at university. She was family to us. Until she witnessed something unfortunate. She saw someone get hurt, Iona guessed. She saw justice being delivered, Mr. Bin corrected gently. But it frightened her. She was not raised in our world. So we helped her leave, start a new life. And now Salman, Madam Yun, is trying to erase that past? Iona asked, looking at Jean. Jean nodded, his expression hardening. My wife comes from a rival family in Seoul. Our marriage was arranged to bring peace between our organizations. But it seems she had other plans all along. Mr. Bin set down his teacup with a sharp click. She has been selling our information to her family for years. Business details, security protocols, names of our allies. But now, he looked at Jean, she has gone too far. The attack tonight wasn't just about finding me, was it? Iona asked. No, Jean said grimly. It was an assassination attempt. The first step in a complete takeover of our family's interests. But why now? What changed? Jean and his grandfather exchanged a look. Tomorrow is the anniversary of my father's death, Jean explained. By tradition, I will formally present the next generation of leadership to our extended family and business partners. It's symbolic, but important. And with you dead before the ceremony, the power vacuum would allow Salman's family to step in, Iona realized. With Salman herself as the grieving widow controlling my assets, Jean added. The pieces were falling into place, a complex puzzle of power, tradition, and betrayal. Iona looked around the room at the family photographs, seeing Jean evolve from a serious child to a young man standing proudly beside his father. This wasn't just business to him, it was legacy, identity, purpose. So what happens now? She asked. Now we prepare, Mr. Bin said, straightening his shoulders. The ceremony will proceed as planned. We will show strength, not fear. Jean frowned. Harabiaji, it's too dangerous. Salman will expect us to continue with the ceremony. She'll be planning another attack. Of course she will, the old man said with unexpected steel in his voice. And we will be ready for it. Their conversation shifted into Korean, becoming more heated. Iona could follow parts of it, Jean arguing for caution, his grandfather insisting on tradition and honor. It was fascinating to see Jean, usually so authoritative, deferring to the older man despite clearly disagreeing with him. Suddenly Mr. Bin clutched at his chest, his face contorting in pain. He began to collapse, Jean moving too slowly with his injured shoulder to catch him. Iona reacted instantly, years of nursing training taking over. She caught the old man before he hit the floor, lowering him gently and checking his pulse. He's having a heart attack, she said, already loosening his collar. Get his medication. Check the bathroom or bedside table, nitroglycerin, probably. Jean called for help while Iona positioned Mr. Bin properly, monitoring his breathing and pulse. When a servant arrived with a small pill bottle, she administered the medicine expertly, speaking soothingly to the elderly man in the Korean phrases she knew. Deep breaths, Mr. Bin. The medicine will help. Stay calm. For 15 tense minutes, she monitored him, refusing to leave his side even when the doctor arrived. The physician confirmed what Iona already knew, a mild heart attack, likely brought on by stress. Your quick action may have saved his life, the doctor told her as Mr. Bin rested, stabilized but weak. Most people panic. You didn't. Later, Jean found her sitting beside his grandfather's bed, watching the old man sleep. Thank you, he said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate speech could have. Iona nodded. I was a cardiac care nurse before everything. Jean sat beside her, careful of his injured shoulder. For a long moment, they watched the steady rise and fall of Mr. Bin's chest. He's a stubborn old man, Jean said finally, his voice soft with affection. He insists the ceremony must continue tomorrow. Is that wise? No. But he believes showing fear would be worse than facing danger. Jean sighed. In our world, reputation is everything. If we hide, we appear weak. If we appear weak, we become targets. Iona studied Jin's profile in the dim light. You really respect him, don't you? He raised me after my father died, Jean said. Everything I know about honor, about duty, about protecting what matters, it came from him. Something had changed between them, Iona realized. The lies and manipulations that had brought them together seemed less important now, overshadowed by the very real dangers they faced together. The doctor says he'll recover, she said. But he needs rest and minimal stress. Jean nodded. Which he won't get if he attends the ceremony. He looked at her directly. I need your help, Iona. With what? With convincing him to stay here, protected, while I handle the ceremony. Jean took her hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. He listens to you. He respects what you did today. Iona considered the request. And what about me? Will I be attending this ceremony too? Jean hesitated. That's your choice. I promised you protection, but I can't guarantee your safety if you come with me tomorrow. Salmon will have planned carefully. It will be dangerous. And if I choose not to go? Then you'll stay here, protected by our most trusted security. After I deal with Salmon, you'll be free to go wherever you wish. Your mother's care will continue to be provided for, regardless of your decision. Iona studied his face, trying to read the emotions behind his careful expression. You'd let me go? Just like that? I never wanted a prisoner, Iona, Jean said quietly. Only an ally. The word hung between them, ally, not employee, or asset or obligation. It suggested partnership, mutual respect, choice. Before she could respond, a weak voice called from the bed. Mr. Bin was awake, gesturing for them to come closer. No secrets, he said, his voice thin but determined. Not in this room. Jean helped his grandfather sit up against the pillows. The old man's eyes were clear despite his pallor. The ceremony tomorrow will force her hand, Jin's grandfather said, his weathered hands reaching for Iona's. She will come for both of you. He pressed an antique jade pendant into her palm. In our family, this is only given to those who carry our name and honor. His eyes shifted to his grandson. Jean has already decided what that means. The question is whether you are prepared for what wearing this truly signifies. The jade pendant felt heavy against Iona's skin as she studied her reflection in the full-length mirror. The emerald green dress hugged her curves perfectly, elegant but not flashy, expensive but not ostentatious. Her hair was swept into a sophisticated updo, and subtle makeup enhanced her features. She hardly recognized herself. Are you ready? Jean appeared in the doorway behind her, devastatingly handsome in a perfectly tailored black suit. Iona touched the jade pendant resting at her collarbone. I'm still not sure this is a good idea. Jean crossed the room to stand beside her. It's the only way to end this, he said quietly. Tonight, we force Salmon into the open. No more shadows, no more proxies. The plan had been carefully crafted over the last 24 hours. Mr. Bin had agreed to stay behind at the family home, protected by trusted guards, while Jean and Iona attended the annual Kim Foundation Charity Gala in downtown Los Angeles, a very public event where all of the city's elite would be watching. "Run me through it one more time," Iona said, needing the reassurance of the plan. Jean nodded. "We arrived together. People will recognize you from the news reports about your disappearance. I'll introduce you as my guest, which will create enough whispers to reach Salman. She'll be there. She never misses a chance to be seen with the right people," Jean confirmed. "When she realizes you're wearing the family pendant, she'll lose it," Iona finished. "In public, where she can't afford to make a scene." "Exactly." Jin's eyes met hers in the mirror. Meanwhile, Minho will be releasing evidence to select guests about the falsified theft accusation and Salman's connections to rival organizations. Iona turned to face him directly. "And if something goes wrong?" Jin's expression softened slightly as he reached up to adjust the pendant at her throat. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. "That's why I asked if you were ready," he said. "You can still stay here, safe." Iona shook her head. "I made my choice when I accepted this." She touched the jade pendant. "I'm just nervous." "Good. Nervousness keeps you alert." Jin's hand lingered near her face for a moment before dropping away. "The car is waiting." The drive into Los Angeles felt surreal. After weeks of hiding, they were deliberately stepping into the spotlight. Iona watched the city lights blur past the window, her mind racing through all the ways tonight could go wrong. "Your heart is pounding," Jean observed from beside her. Iona glanced at him. "How can you tell?" "The pulse in your neck." His eyes drifted to the spot just above her collarbone. "It gives you away." She pressed her hand against her throat self-consciously. "I've never done anything like this before." "Few people have." Jin's voice was reassuring. "Just remember, in that room, you belong to me. No one will dare touch you." The possessive words should have bothered her, but instead they sent another unexpected shiver through her body. The lines between their arrangement and something deeper had been blurring more each day. The Kim Foundation Gala was being held at the Grand Wilshire Hotel, one of downtown's most prestigious venues. As their car pulled up to the entrance, camera flashes illuminated the red carpet where Los Angeles's wealthiest and most influential citizens posed and preened. "Ready?" Jean asked as the driver opened his door. Iona took a deep breath. "Ready." Jean stepped out first, buttoning his jacket before turning to offer his hand to Iona. The moment she emerged from the car, she felt the shift in the atmosphere, the subtle double takes, the whispered comments, the curious stares. She was the missing woman from the news, now appearing on the arm of one of the city's most powerful businessmen. Jean placed his hand at the small of her back, a steadying pressure as they walked the gauntlet of stairs and flashbulbs. He nodded politely to acquaintances but kept moving, guiding her into the hotel's grand ballroom where crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over hundreds of elegantly dressed guests. "Mr. Bin." A middle-aged woman in an overly tight dress approached them immediately, her smile stretched unnaturally by too many procedures. "We didn't expect you tonight." "And with a guest." Jean inclined his head politely. "Mrs. Cho. May I introduce Iona Sterling?" The woman's eyes widened in recognition. "Sterling? But aren't you the woman from the news reports?" Iona finished for her, smiling calmly despite her racing heart. "Yes, that's me. The reports of my disappearance were greatly exaggerated." Mrs. Cho glanced between them, clearly calculating the gossip value of this encounter. "Well. How interesting. And where is Mrs. Bin tonight?" "My wife will be arriving separately," Jean said smoothly. Business kept her detained. As they moved away, Iona could practically feel the woman's eyes boring into her back. "That went well," she murmured. "It's just beginning," Jean replied. "Salman will have heard we're here within minutes." They circulated through the ballroom, Jean introducing Iona to various business associates and community leaders. With each introduction, the whispers grew, spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Iona felt eyes following her everywhere, some curious, some judgmental, some calculating. "That pendant," an elderly Korean woman remarked during one introduction, her eyes narrowing on the jade at Iona's throat. "That is the Bin family heirloom, is it not?" "Yes, it is," Jean confirmed, his hand resting possessively at Iona's waist. "My grandfather insisted." The woman's eyebrows nearly reached her hairline, but she said nothing more, merely bowing slightly before moving away. "That's going to get back to Salmon," Iona whispered. "That's the point," Jean replied, his breath warm against her ear. "Are you doing okay?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though her nerves were stretched to the breaking point. "Any sign of her yet?" "Not yet, but," Jean stopped abruptly, his eyes fixed on something across the room. "She's here." Iona followed his gaze. Salmon Yun, Madame Yun, had just entered the ballroom, a vision in crimson silk that emphasized her slender figure. Her dark hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, diamonds glittering at her ears and throat. She was beautiful in a sharp, dangerous way, like an exquisite knife. "She hasn't seen us yet," Jean observed. "Let's wait." They positioned themselves near the bar, where they had a clear view of Salmon working the room, greeting important guests, laughing at appropriate moments, playing the perfect society wife. It was a masterful performance. Then someone, Iona couldn't see who, leaned in to whisper something in Salmon's ear. The woman's smile froze, her head turning slowly until her eyes locked on Jean and Iona. For a brief moment, raw fury flashed across her perfect features before her mask slipped back into place. She excused herself from her current conversation and began making her way toward them, weaving through the crowd with predatory grace. "She's coming," Iona whispered, fighting the instinct to step back. "Good," Jean replied, his voice calm. "Remember, she can't touch you here." Salmon reached them, her smile so convincing that only someone who knew her well would see the rage burning behind it. "Darling," she greeted Jean, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "What a surprise. I thought you were handling family business tonight." "I am," Jean replied evenly. Salmon's eyes slid to Iona, taking in her presence, her dress, and finally, lingering with barely contained shock, on the jade pendant. "Miss Sterling. How unexpected. We've all been so worried about your disappearance." "Have you?" Iona asked, finding her courage. "That's interesting, considering you were the one who accused me of theft." Salmon's smile didn't waver. "A terrible misunderstanding. The bracelet was found shortly after. I've been trying to locate you to apologize." "With armed men?" Jean asked quietly. "In Malibu?" A flash of something, fear, perhaps, crossed Salmon's face before disappearing. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said smoothly. Her eyes returned to the pendant at Iona's throat. "That's an interesting piece of jewelry." "A gift," Iona said, touching it lightly. "From Mr. Bin. The elder Mr. Bin." Salmon's composure cracked, just slightly. "I see." She turned to Jean, switching to rapid Korean that Iona could mostly follow. "You disgrace our family by bringing this woman here, giving her that pendant? What are you thinking?" Jean replied in English. "I'm thinking it's time for truth, Salmon. About the bracelet. About the men you sent. About your family's connections to the Park Syndicate." Salmon paled slightly. "You're making a scene," she hissed, glancing around at nearby guests who were pretending not to listen. "No, you are," Jean corrected her. "Minho is currently showing certain guests evidence of your activities. Your account's being used to fund attacks on our businesses. Your meetings with park representatives." "You have nothing," Salmon snapped, her mask slipping further. "We have everything," Jean said calmly. "Including your deleted texts about setting up Miss Sterling with a false theft accusation." Iona watched the realization dawn on Salmon's face, This wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a carefully orchestrated takedown. You wouldn't dare expose family business publicly, Salman said, her voice low with threat. You stopped being family the moment you sent men to kill me, Jean replied. His tone was conversational, but Iona could feel the tension in him. The ceremony will proceed tomorrow without you. Something dangerous flashed in Salman's eyes. We'll see about that. She glanced at Iona. Enjoy your moment, girl. It won't last. With that, she turned and walked away, her back rigid with fury. Iona released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was intense. It's not over, Jean warned, watching Salman speak urgently into her phone across the room. She's planning something. Should we leave? Jean shook his head. Not yet. We need to be seen by enough people to ensure the story spreads, that you're safe, that the theft accusation was false, that Salman's credibility is damaged. They continued circulating, though Iona could feel the weight of Salman's glare following them around the room. Minho appeared occasionally, exchanging brief words with Jean before disappearing again. It's working, Jean told her after one such conversation. Several key community leaders have seen the evidence. Salman's influence is already crumbling. The evening wore on, a strange dance of social niceties layered over life-or-death stakes. Iona's feet ached in her heels, but she maintained her composure, drawing on reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. As the event began winding down, Jean guided her toward a quiet terrace overlooking the city lights. The cool night air was a relief after the stuffy ballroom. You did well in there, Jean said, loosening his tie slightly. Not everyone could have faced her so calmly. I wasn't calm, Iona admitted. I was terrified. You didn't show it, Jean said, his voice warm with approval. That's what matters. Iona turned to face the cityscape, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. What happens now? We return to my grandfather's house tonight. Tomorrow, the ceremony proceeds, and I officially announce changes to the family leadership structure, removing Salman and her allies. And then? Jean stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring beside her. And then you decide what you want. Your life restored. Your mother's care continued. Whatever future you choose. Iona looked up at him. What if the future I choose isn't what you expect? Something shifted in Jin's expression, a vulnerability she'd rarely glimpsed beneath his controlled exterior. What future would that be? Words failed her. Instead, Iona reached up, her fingers brushing his jawline. Jean went perfectly still, his eyes darkening as he searched her face. Iona, he said softly, a question in her name. She answered by closing the distance between them, her lips finding his in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened into something neither of them had anticipated. Jin's arms wrapped around her, pulling her against him as months of tension and confusion and growing connection crystallized into something undeniable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jean rested his forehead against hers. I didn't plan for this, he admitted. Neither did I, Iona whispered. But here we are. For a moment, they simply stood there, the world narrowed to just the two of them. Then Jin's phone vibrated, breaking the spell. Minho says it's time to leave, he said, checking the message. Salman left 20 minutes ago. It's not safe to linger. Reluctantly, they returned to the ballroom, making their goodbyes to key guests before heading for the exit. Jin's driver had brought the car around to a side entrance to avoid the main crowd. As they approached the vehicle, Iona felt a strange unease. Jean. I know, he murmured, his hand moving subtly toward his concealed weapon. Something's wrong. The driver stepped out, bowing slightly as he opened the rear door. He was a new man, one Iona hadn't seen before, but Jean seemed to recognize him. Mr. Bin, the driver said respectfully. Miss Sterling. Jean hesitated, scanning the area around them. Where is Q? Called away on family emergency, sir, the driver explained smoothly. I was sent as replacement. Jean exchanged a look with Iona, a silent warning to stay alert. They slid into the back seat, Jean positioning himself protectively closer to her than usual. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Jean sent a quick text, presumably to Minho. The city streets flowed past the windows, gradually thinning of traffic as they left downtown. "We're going the wrong way," Jean said suddenly, his voice sharp. "This isn't the route to the highway." The driver glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression changing from deferential to cold. "No, it isn't." Jean reached for his gun, but the car suddenly accelerated, throwing them back against the seats. At the same moment, a panel slid open between the front and back seats, and a fine mist sprayed into the rear compartment. "Don't breathe," Jean shouted, pulling Iona against him and covering her mouth with his hand. But it was too late, she'd already inhaled the sweet-smelling chemical. Her vision began to blur, limbs growing heavy. Jean was struggling with the door locks, which had been electronically disabled. The last thing she saw was Jean smashing his elbow against the window, the glass cracking but not breaking. The driver swerved sharply, throwing them sideways. Someone reached through from the front seat, another man Iona hadn't noticed before, pressing a cloth over her face. The chemical smell intensified. As consciousness faded, she heard Jin's roar of rage, followed by gunshots. Her last thought before darkness took her wasn't fear for herself, but the realization that she'd fallen in love with the most dangerous man in Los Angeles. And now, that love might get them both killed. Cold. That was Iona's first sensation as consciousness slowly returned. Cold concrete against her cheek, cold air filling her lungs, cold fear crawling up her spine as memory flooded back. The gala. The confrontation with Salman. The kiss. And then, the car. The sweet-smelling chemical. Jean fighting. She forced her heavy eyelids open, blinking against harsh fluorescent lights hanging from a distant ceiling. She was lying on a concrete floor in what appeared to be an enormous warehouse. Stacks of shipping containers created a maze-like arrangement around her, and the faint smell of salt water told her they must be near the harbor. Finally awake, a familiar voice said, "I was beginning to think they gave you too much." Iona struggled to sit up, her head pounding from the after-effects of whatever drug they'd used on her. Salman Yun stood a few feet away, no longer in her elegant gala dress but in a practical black pantsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, all pretense of society wife abandoned. "Where's Jean?" Iona's voice came out as a rasp. Salman's perfectly painted lips curved into a cold smile. "Worried about your lover?" "How touching." Iona looked around the vast space. Several men in tactical gear stood at a distance, weapons visible. There was no sign of Jean. "If you've hurt him," she began. "You'll what?" Salman laughed, the sound echoing off the metal containers. "Look at yourself, Miss Sterling. You're in no position to make threats." Iona slowly got to her feet, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to send her back to the floor. She needed to stay calm, to think clearly. Jean had prepared her for this, had trained her for exactly this situation. Assess your surroundings. Identify exits. Look for potential weapons. Keep them talking. "Why am I here?" Iona asked, buying time as she scanned the warehouse. "If Jean is who you want, why take me at all?" "Because you're the perfect bait," Salman said, circling Iona like a predator. "Jean has developed quite an attachment to you. Unexpected, but useful. You think he'll come for me?" "I know he will." Salman stopped pacing. "My husband has many qualities I despise, but loyalty is his most predictable weakness." Iona noticed a large digital clock on the warehouse wall, 2:17 a.m. The ceremony was scheduled for noon. This was all about stopping Jean from removing Salman from power. "This isn't just about me," Iona said, understanding dawning. "Or even about Jean. This is about the ceremony tomorrow." Something flickered in Salman's eyes, surprise, perhaps, that Iona knew about the ceremony. Clever girl, she said. Yes, the ceremony is inconvenient for my plans. Your plans to take over Jin's organization, Iona continued. To hand it over to your family in Seoul. This time, Salmon's surprise was unmistakable. You've been busy learning our world, she said, reassessing Iona with new eyes. But you don't understand the full picture. Then explain it to me, Iona challenged, taking a careful step toward a stack of pallets that might provide cover if needed. Why marry Jin if you plan to betray him? Salmon checked her watch before answering. The Bin family has something my family needs, legitimacy. American connections. Clean businesses to wash dirty money. She shrugged elegantly. My father arranged our marriage with Jin's father before he died. The plan was always for me to gradually bring our organizations together. But that wasn't fast enough for you, Iona guessed. Jin is too traditional, Salmon said with distaste. Too concerned with his grandfather's outdated code of honor. Too focused on protecting the community instead of expanding our power. As Salmon spoke, Iona noticed a small security camera blinking in the corner of the warehouse. If Jin was searching for her, Minho would be tracking security feeds throughout the city. She needed to stay in view of that camera. And how does my mother fit into all this? Iona asked, deliberately moving into better view of the camera. Salmon's eyes narrowed. Your mother was a loose end. Someone who knew too much about the Bin family's early days my father's organization had a hand in. You're saying your family was involved with the Bins back then? As rivals, Salmon clarified. There was an incident, a conflict that your mother witnessed. If she ever came forward with what she saw, certain arrangements between our families would be complicated. The pieces clicked into place. That's why you were so determined to get rid of me when you found out who I was. You thought I knew something. Precautionary, Salmon said dismissively. But then Jin took such an interest in protecting you. It made me curious what you might be worth to him. A distant sound caught Iona's attention, a car door closing somewhere outside the warehouse. Salmon heard it too, her posture stiffening as she motioned to one of her men. It seems we don't have much time left for our chat, Salmon said, checking her watch again. Jin is more efficient than I expected. The man returned, whispering something in Salmon's ear that made her smile coldly. Perfect, she said. Bring him in. Iona's heart raced as the large metal door at the far end of the warehouse rolled open. Two armed men dragged in a figure whose head was covered with a black hood. The person's hands were bound, but even with the hood, Iona recognized Jin's build, his posture. They forced him to his knees about 20 feet from where Iona stood. Remove it, Salmon ordered. One of the men yanked off the hood, revealing Jin's face. He had a cut above his eye and a split lip, but otherwise appeared unharmed. His eyes immediately found Iona's, relief washing over his features when he saw she was standing, apparently uninjured. Are you hurt? He asked her directly, ignoring Salmon completely. I'm okay, Iona assured him. They drugged me, but I'm fine. Jin nodded once, then finally turned his attention to his wife. This is beneath even you, Salmon, he said, his voice steady despite his position. Taking civilians to settle family business. Miss Sterling stopped being a civilian when you gave her my family's jade, Salmon replied sharply. When you brought her into our world. Jin's expression remained impassive, but Iona could read the calculation in his eyes. He was buying time, assessing the situation just as she had been. What do you want? He asked Salmon. Originally? Your shares in the company. Control of your territory. A smooth transition as the grieving widow. Salmon sighed dramatically. But you've complicated things by exposing me at the gala. So now I need something else. And that is? Your grandfather's seal, Salmon said. The one he'll use at the ceremony to transfer power. Jin's face betrayed nothing, but Iona saw his shoulders tense. The seal must be significant, perhaps the only way to legitimize the power transfer in the eyes of the community. It's not here, Jean said. It's with my grandfather. I know, Salmon replied calmly. That's why you're going to call him and tell him to bring it here. Now. Jean laughed, the sound echoing off the warehouse walls. He would never. He will if Miss Sterling's life depends on it, Salmon cut in, nodding to one of her men who immediately pressed a gun to Iona's temple. Iona froze, her breath catching. She could feel the cold metal against her skin, see the fury building in Jin's eyes. You have 1 hour, Salmon continued. Call him. Tell him to bring the seal alone. No security, no Minho. Just an old man and his precious heirloom. Jin's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? Then we find out if Miss Sterling's skull is as hard as her stubbornness suggests. Salmon nodded to another of her men, who placed a phone in front of Jean. Your choice. Iona caught Jin's eye, trying to communicate without words. They both knew bringing his grandfather here would be catastrophic, not just for the family business, but for the old man's health. There had to be another way. Jean seemed to understand. His eyes flickered briefly to something behind Iona, a fire alarm on the wall, partially hidden by a stack of crates. Let me speak to Iona first, Jean said to Salmon. Privately. Then I'll call my grandfather. How touching, Salmon mocked. A final goodbye? A chance to explain why I'm doing this, Jean countered. She deserves that much. Salmon considered for a moment, then nodded. 2 minutes. But my men stay within shooting distance. She signaled her guards to step back slightly, giving them the illusion of privacy while remaining close enough to hear everything. Jean rose slowly to his feet, his bound hands in front of him. As he approached Iona, she could see him subtly working at the restraints. I'm sorry, he said loudly, clearly meant for Salmon's benefit. Then, in a whisper only Iona could hear, fire alarm. Create chaos. I'll handle the rest. Iona nodded almost imperceptibly, her mind racing to formulate a plan. Jean, she said loudly, injecting a tremor into her voice. I don't feel well. She swayed slightly, one hand going to her head in a theatrical gesture while the other grabbed his arm for support. To anyone watching, it looked like she was dizzy from the drugs they'd given her. In reality, she was checking his pulse, assessing his physical state. Side effect of the sedative, she whispered, her lips barely moving. I'll fake a seizure. When I fall, go for the alarm. Jean squeezed her hand in acknowledgement. Time's up, Salmon called. Make the call, Jean. Jean turned away from Iona, facing his wife. I need a moment to think about what to tell him. There's nothing to think about, Salmon snapped. Tell him to bring the seal or the girl dies. Iona took her cue. She made a small choking sound, drawing everyone's attention. Then she began to tremble, her eyes rolling back. She's having a reaction to the drug, Jean shouted, moving toward her with convincing alarm. Iona collapsed, her body convulsing in a convincing imitation of a seizure. She'd seen enough of them during her nursing training to mimic the symptoms, the rigid limbs, the jerking movements, the labored breathing. The guard nearest her stepped back in surprise. Salmon moved closer, momentarily distracted. What's happening to her? She demanded. Jean knelt beside Iona. She needs medical attention. The drug you used, some people have allergic reactions. In one fluid motion, Jin's hands came free from their restraints. He must have been working on them the entire time. He lunged past Iona toward the fire alarm, smashing his fist against the glass. A deafening klaxon filled the warehouse, and overhead sprinklers activated immediately, drenching everyone. In the chaos, Jean moved with lightning speed, tackling the nearest guard and wrestling away his weapon. Iona rolled behind a stack of pallets for cover as gunfire erupted. Through the spray of water and the flashing emergency lights, she saw Jean taking out one guard after another with ruthless efficiency. Salmon was screaming orders, backing toward an exit as her men formed a protective circle around her. Jean was outnumbered and outgunned, fighting his way toward Iona. A guard spotted her behind the pallets and raised his weapon. Iona didn't think. She grabbed a heavy metal pipe lying nearby and swung it with all her strength, catching him across the knees. He went down with a howl of pain, his gun skittering across the wet floor. Iona lunged for it, her fingers closing around the unfamiliar weight. She'd never fired a gun before, but Jean had taught her the basics. Safety off. Aim. Squeeze, don't pull. She didn't need to shoot. The presence of the weapon in her hands was enough to make the injured guard retreat, limping toward his colleagues. Through the chaos, she spotted Jean. He'd almost reached her position when 3 more men burst through a side entrance, reinforcements for Salmon. One of them raised what looked like an assault rifle. Jean! Iona screamed in warning. He turned, but too late. The man fired a burst that would have caught Jean directly if Iona hadn't acted on instinct, throwing the heavy pipe with surprising accuracy. It struck the shooter's arm, sending his bullets wide, most of them. Jean staggered, clutching his side where one bullet had found its mark. Still, he kept moving, firing back at the new attackers as he finally reached Iona's position. "Are you hit?" he gasped, pushing her deeper behind the pallets. "No," she said, eyes fixed on the growing bloodstain on his shirt. "But you are." "It's nothing," he said, though his face was pale beneath the sprinkler water. "We need to move. More men will be coming." A new sound cut through the chaos, a series of explosions from the far side of the warehouse. The concussions were powerful enough to shake the floor beneath them. "Minho," Jean said with grim satisfaction. Right on time. The explosions had breached the warehouse wall, creating a diversion that drew most of Salmon's men away from their position. Through the smoke and water, Iona could see figures moving in tactical gear, Jin's men, coming to their rescue. "We need to go now," Jean urged, pulling Iona toward the newly created exit. They ran in a crouch, using shipping containers for cover. Jean moved more slowly with each step, the blood loss clearly affecting him despite his determination. They were almost at the breach when Iona heard a shout behind them. She turned to see Salmon, alone now, her perfect appearance ruined by the sprinklers, pointing a gun directly at Jin's back. "Jean!" Iona cried out, but he was already turning, raising his own weapon. 2 shots rang out simultaneously. Salmon staggered backward, a look of shock on her face as red bloomed across her shoulder. But her bullet had found its mark too. Jean collapsed to his knees, blood spreading across his chest. Iona caught him before he hit the ground. "Jean! Jean, look at me." His eyes were unfocused, his breathing shallow. "Go," he whispered. "Minho will get you out." "I'm not leaving you," Iona said fiercely, pressing her hands against the wound to stem the bleeding. She looked around desperately for help. The warehouse was in chaos. Fires had broken out from the explosions, smoke filling the air. Minho and his men were engaged in a firefight with Salmon's remaining guards. No one was coming to help them. Through the smoke, Iona saw Salmon being dragged away by one of her men. Their eyes met briefly, hatred in Salmon's, determination in Iona's. Then they were gone. Iona turned her attention back to Jean. "Stay with me," she begged as his eyes fluttered. She needed to get him out, but she couldn't carry him, and the fire was spreading rapidly, cutting off their escape route. The warehouse was burning around them, exit routes disappearing with each passing second. "I can't carry you out," she whispered, tears mingling with the sprinkler water on her face. Jin's hand weakly caught hers, pressing something metal into her palm. "Car keys." "You don't need to carry me," he said, his voice barely audible. "You need to leave me. This is my gift to you. Freedom." His eyes closed as sirens wailed in the distance. "You don't need to carry me. You need to leave me. This is my gift to you. Freedom." Jin's eyes closed as sirens wailed in the distance. The warehouse burned around them, smoke thickening, the heat intensifying with each passing second. Iona stared at the car keys in her palm. Freedom. The very thing she'd wanted since that first day in the mansion. The chance to escape, to start over, to leave this dangerous world behind. But freedom meant nothing if Jean wasn't alive to see it. No, she said, though Jean couldn't hear her. That's not how this ends. She shoved the keys into her dress pocket and looked around desperately. The sprinklers had done little against the growing inferno. Smoke stung her eyes and burned her lungs. They had minutes, maybe seconds before their position would be overrun by flames. 20 feet away, a forklift sat abandoned near some shipping crates. Iona had never driven one before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I'm coming back, she promised Jin's unconscious form before sprinting to the machine. The keys were still in the ignition. She climbed into the seat, studying the controls frantically. Lever for lift, pedals for movement. It couldn't be that different from a car, right? The forklift roared to life, lurching forward as she pressed too hard on the accelerator. She corrected quickly, guiding the machine back to Jean. Using the hydraulic lift, she raised the forks to form a makeshift stretcher platform. Then, with strength born from pure adrenaline, she dragged Jin's limp body onto the forks, positioning him as securely as possible. Hold on, she whispered, though he couldn't hear her. Just hold on. She drove slowly, navigating through the burning debris toward the breach Minho's team had created. The warehouse was becoming an inferno behind them, support beams crashing down as the fire consumed everything. Outside, chaos reigned. Police sirens wailed, firefighters were arriving, and somewhere in the distance, Iona could hear gunfire, the battle between Jin's men and Salmon still raging. Minho appeared through the smoke, his face black with soot, eyes widening at the sight of Iona driving the forklift with Jin's bleeding body balanced precariously on the forks. He's been shot, she shouted over the roar of the fire. Twice. He needs a hospital. Minho barked orders in Korean, and Jin's men converged, carefully lifting their boss from the forklift onto a waiting SUV. The police are coming, Minho told Iona as he helped her down from the forklift. We can't be found here. I'm going with him, Iona said, climbing into the SUV beside Jin's motionless form. Minho nodded once, respect evident in his eyes. You saved him, he said simply before shutting the door. The vehicle sped away just as the warehouse roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. Iona cradled Jin's head in her lap, applying pressure to his wounds with strips torn from her once beautiful dress. Don't you dare die on me, she whispered fiercely. Not after everything we've been through. His blood soaked through the fabric, warm and terrifying. His skin was too pale, his breathing too shallow. But his heart still beat beneath her fingers, stubborn, resilient, fighting. Just like him. The private clinic was discreet, expensive, and didn't ask questions when a bleeding man was rushed through their service entrance at 3 a.m. The staff moved with practiced efficiency, whisking Jean away to surgery while Iona stood in the hallway, her green dress ruined with smoke and blood. Mrs. Park arrived within the hour, bringing clean clothes and tearful embraces. Minho came and went, coordinating security, managing the aftermath of the warehouse battle, keeping the authorities at bay. Dawn broke as Iona sat in the waiting room, showered and changed but unable to rest. The jade pendant, somehow still around her neck despite everything, felt heavy against her skin. Miss Sterling? She looked up to see an elderly man with silver hair and a white coat. Mr. Bin is out of surgery, the doctor said. We removed 2 bullets and repaired the damage. He lost a lot of blood, but he's stable. He'll recover? Iona asked, her voice small with exhaustion and hope. He's strong, the doctor replied. And he has something to live for. His knowing gaze lingered on the jade pendant before he added, you can see him now. Jin's room was private and secure, with 2 of his men standing guard outside. Inside, machines beeped steadily, monitoring his vital signs. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the hospital bed with tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. Iona sat beside him, taking his hand gently in hers. His skin was warm, a good sign. I didn't leave you, she said quietly. I couldn't. A slight pressure against her fingers, Jean squeezing her hand weakly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then finding her face. Iona, he whispered, his voice rough. You're safe. She laughed softly through sudden tears. I'm safe? You're the one who got shot. Twice. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Details. The door opened, and Jin's grandfather entered, leaning heavily on his cane. His face was drawn with worry, but his eyes were sharp as ever. Stubborn boy, the old man said gruffly, moving to stand at Jin's other side. Always doing things the hard way. Jean tried to sit up, wincing with pain. Harabiaji, the ceremony has been postponed, his grandfather said firmly. Your health is more important. And Saman? Jean asked, his voice hardening. Minho stepped into the room. Wounded but escaped, he reported. We're tracking her. Her organization is in chaos after last night.